Happiness, it's an effect of believing that you possess something good. Now, the problem there is, what if you're wrong? You can nickel and dime yourself out of time. You have 3 weeks to work on something and you procrastinate. All of a sudden, it's the night before. All of a sudden, you're 80 and you did that your whole life. To those who have cancer, I'd say be aware that you are the one who gets to set the tone. People will follow your lead.
Hey, dear listener. Thank you for listening up to this point. Be sure to like and subscribe. By so doing, you help grow this podcast in incredible ways you cannot even imagine. Thank you. Welcome to another inspiring episode of GWP Podcast. Today, we have a remarkable guest whose story is nothing short of a testament to the power of faith, resilience, and the human spirit. On December 16, 2022, our guest, Will Brantley, received life-altering diagnosis, stage 4 nasopharyngeal squamous cell carcinoma. In the simplest terms, it is an incurable cancer, a chilling prognosis that no one would ever wish to face. For a father of 3 young children, the thought of leaving them behind was a terrifying prospect. But what unfolded in the months that followed is a tale of unwavering hope and miraculous transformation. Just 6 months later, 40 pounds lighter, and with unyielding determination, Will's PET scan brought unimaginable news: no sign of active cancer. In this episode, we delve deep into Will's journey, from the terrifying days of diagnosis to his remarkable recovery. We explore the vital role faith plays in his healing process, his financial planning insights, and how he's embraced his newfound zeal. Let's dive into the episode. First off, I want to say thank you very much, Will, for taking the time to be on GWP Podcast. If you're listening to this episode right now, I want you to know that you're very fortunate. I'm very fortunate to be in this room with you right now, to be speaking to you, because I think you have a wealth of knowledge and your experience is something that everyone should be able to learn from and get access to. So I feel very fortunate that we're using this platform to bring your experience out there for people to witness and see. A little backstory on how we connected.
Yeah.
I read about your story on LinkedIn and I was moved because, man, I just couldn't imagine having 3 kids and being diagnosed with cancer. I didn't even know how to reach out in the beginning. It was more of, do I reach out with some condolence? But then I started to think and I said, I'm sure you have a great story to tell. There's so much that probably happened before you got to this point where you were diagnosed with cancer. And so I know it wasn't discovered until it was a bit late, about stage 4, when it was discovered. So that's huge. When we think about building wealth, especially on GWP, one thing that I've learned is health is wealth. If you don't have health, forget about building wealth. There's no point. And so for someone that's listening right now and wondering, who's Will? What was your story before you were even diagnosed with cancer? Can you share that with us?
Yeah. And first off, thanks for having me. I'm humbled to be on here. This is my first time being on a podcast or anything like that. So I definitely appreciate you reaching out. Cool experience and nice to getting to know you in person here today. Yeah, like you said, father of 3 kids, young kids. My oldest is gonna, she's about to turn 5. So I have 2 girls and a boy. The youngest we had just 3 months before I was diagnosed with cancer. Been married about close to 10 years now, to a wonderful woman, my wife, Rachel. But yeah, it's wild, my background. I'm the oldest of 5 kids, raised in a big household in that way, from Seattle area originally, so Pacific Northwest. Did a lot of salmon fishing and enjoyed some of the beautiful outdoors up that way, and then moved to Arizona, to a small town, before going to college, and then winding up in the Phoenix area. So like cancer's just not something you ever think's gonna affect you. You hear about it a lot. And now that I've had cancer, it's interesting where a lot of people come out of the woodwork. So you wind up meeting a lot of people who have cancer, or finding out others who have had it in the past, or hearing stories about people who've been affected by cancer, and one of their loved ones. But there's a couple extended relatives and stuff, but I've never had a close experience with it. So that was like the furthest thing from my mind, that I would be experiencing cancer. It's funny, in the months leading up, I actually had I met with my general practitioner, and I had a checkup, right? Your annual checkup and blood work. And I was super worried that my cholesterol was a little bit high. And it's so funny looking back on it now, like that was my concern. I had cancer, right? It's a little bit eerie looking at pictures back then, knowing, I had cancer at that time. So yeah, in the days leading up to it, just to get everyone up to speed, quick synopsis, I had some symptoms, in probably the 6 months prior to being diagnosed, that looking back, I know now were cancer, but I didn't at the time. And I had checkups with my doctor. Being a young guy, some of these symptoms resemble allergies, right? So I had nasal pharyngeal cancer, so it started kind of in the middle of my head, behind my nose. Wound up getting into my lymph nodes in my neck, and then a lot of my bones in my spine and my hip. I wound up having to have hip surgery. But I didn't know any of that. So hip surgery, keep that in context, right? I'd been in the gym doing squats, trying to take care of my health. So not to get anyone paranoid. You shouldn't be paranoid. You probably don't have a cancer. It's uncommon. So, but one piece of advice I'd give is definitely, if you have any sense anything's going on, if you don't feel like the answers to the questions you're getting are satisfactory, press on it, right? Press on those. Don't be paranoid. Don't live in fear, but press the case, right? The doctor's there working for you. So not everyone has access. There's different levels there in terms of insurance and whatever else scenarios you might have in terms of access to healthcare. But take care of yourself, take care of your diet, take care of your exercise. Those things are things that you can do regardless of your budget and everything else. There's ways that you can take care of yourself without having to have a lot of money to spend on it. So I'd definitely encourage people there, because regardless of what you're doing, if you don't have that health, right,
it doesn't really mean anything.
It doesn't mean anything.
It's funny you say that. So on our way here, for context, we're recording in Arizona today. Mm-hmm. So we flew out all the way to come here and record with Will today. And on our way here on the flight, I was reflecting a little bit, looking at my goals that I wrote for 2023. And I did write my goals in a couple of aspects of my life. So my spiritual goals, my health goals, my wealth goals, and so on. And I was looking at my health goals, and one of the things that I had written down was to take my health more seriously and utilize professional advice. A lot of young adults feel like we're strong, we're hitting the gym 3 times a week, everything is good, I'm eating right, I'm probably on a diet, there's nothing to worry about. I'm sure now that you've had this experience with cancer, that's changed your perspective. For someone that feels that way, what advice would you give them?
Yeah. One, again, don't be paranoid. But cancer can really live below the surface, right? So, like I mentioned, I was in the gym doing squats with weight. I'm not some muscle man, right? I'm not setting limits or records out there. But I was probably doing more than the average guy on the street can do, right? Had a full range of motion. Well, guess what? The biggest tumor in my body was in my hip, and I didn't have any pain, right? So, one, things like that can be concealed. Two, you probably are healthy. Those are good things that you're doing. But you're not impervious. So whether it's cancer or it's something else, hardship's probably going to strike. And so you want to be mentally prepared for that. You want to be physically prepared as much as you can be, right? I'm not saying that I'm an exemplar of being prepared in that way, but prepare for it. We're all getting older. I think that's one way. I made a short video about this recently. Is we're all gonna die. This is not morbid. This is with hope. We're all gonna die, and you should think about that. Not to dwell on it in a negative way, but there's reality there. So it forces you to think about the things you're doing in your life.
Yeah.
Not just extending your life. That's, try to take care of your health in that way too. But how are you spending the time you have? What are you doing? What are your goals?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's really important. And one thing that strikes me also is your ability to stay positive, motivated, hopeful throughout this journey. If I try to put myself in your shoes and ask myself, what would be my state of mind if I was in that situation? And it's interesting how you manage to stay hopeful. So, like you just mentioned, life is hard, right? We're always gonna deal with uncertainty, hardships. For people that are maybe going through certain adversities in life right now, what advice would you give them in staying motivated and staying hopeful?
Yeah. My advice comes from a pretty particular angle. A side note, we were joking, when we were having lunch today, like, hardship like this, you get cancer. Sometimes they stack, right? Your car doesn't stop breaking down because you have cancer. Life goes on, right? And so sometimes you can really get piled on with the problems and the hardship. But yeah, that's a good question. I think several things. One, I'd emphasize, I did have low points. So I don't want to fool you that I'm just this eternal optimist that didn't have any struggles or sadness during this. It definitely hit me in a certain way, right? I have 3 kids. Like, one of the big things, the hardest thing probably for me was thinking about leaving my family. And in particular, my kids are so young. The idea that they wouldn't remember me was really hard. So I think sometimes, you get this idea, you see people, and that's why I want to give the disclaimer that I'm not always just so positive. You see people and you think, man, how's that? How do they say so positive? I feel so down about everything. I feel down sometimes too. I won't minimize it. I've gotten really depressed at different times in my life. But people have different dispositions that way. So it's not just your disposition. And I would draw a distinction between something that really became clear to me during this is the distinction between true hope and false hope. And so I think staying positive for me is connected up to where does your hope lie? So as a Christian, right, there's the idea of faith. Faith is related to hope. And I think faith has to do with it's not contrasted with thinking. Sometimes people portray it that way, right? Like faith and reason are opposed. I don't think that's the case. I think, in the Bible, it's contrasted with sight, right? It says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So it's contrasted with sight. So part of that is God. God is a spirit. He's not a physical thing that I can, I see the finger of God coming out of the sky, or he's not physical like that, right? So he's unseen. So it involves faith, not that it doesn't make sense. It does make sense, but that you don't see it. And in the same way, that's how we understand his promises, right? Our understanding of those promises and relying on those is where our hope is. So I have hope in the promises for my own personal life, right? So I have salvation through Christ and his death on the cross, and that gives me hope. Now, in that, there could still be sadness. If I wind up dying, there's separation from my family, and that's sad. And thinking about, like, how will they go on without me? What will the raising of my kids look like, right? I think on the macro scale, there's more to it also. So we got those promises that help me to have hope, which helps me to stay positive, because I know ultimately I have eternal life. There's nothing that can take that away from me. And we are never, so contrasting with false hope, like we aren't promised a life without suffering. I think that's where it sometimes goes sideways. A lot of times people would say to me, well, God's going to heal you. Well, we don't know that. There are many people he doesn't heal, and it's not because they're worse or better than me. So we don't know that. We can hope that and pray that. We can have a faith that he's able to do that. But we don't want to put words in his mouth and say he will do this, right? Because what's that going to do if it doesn't happen? It's going to harm people's belief. They say, well, maybe he's not there. And God's saying, well, I didn't say I was going to do that. But then when you zoom out to the macro view, I'll use a technical word not to alienate people, but I'll kind of elaborate what I mean. I believe in a view called postmillennialism. Postmillennial. So there's postmillennial, amillennial, premillennial. There's these different millennial views, and it's different Christian views on how the culmination of history will be, when that will happen. So long story short, it's a view that the kingdom of God will succeed on the earth, right? So through the Great Commission, the nations will be discipled, and there will be success in that way. And part of God bringing that about, so through history, evil will be removed, sin will be removed, understanding and faith will grow. Part of that is the Great Commission. So I'm called to participate in that work that God has for the church, for the believers in the world, to go out and be a witness to others. And so with that perspective, now my cancer is scary, but it becomes, right, an opportunity. Because now I'm able to use it. It opens up new conversations. I would have never met you, Papa, if I didn't have cancer, right?
That's true.
Wherever it comes to that, like, now we're friends. And I've had so many things like that. Now, that might not be everyone's personality. Maybe they're more introverted and they don't want to go do those things. That's okay. Maybe it's, happens in your life in a different way. And I'm not saying I want everyone to have cancer to go through that. But I think that's part of what allows me to maintain hope is, okay, I know that I have this security in a certain way, or I have salvation. That doesn't mean I'm not going to suffer, but the end is going to be good. God is good. And then big picture, I can contribute to this work that I know is firm.
Yeah.
Right. So I can put my hope in that.
Yeah, absolutely, man. A lot to unpack there.
Yeah, I know. I'm kind of long-winded, so you gotta,
No worries. No. But a lot to unpack there. And one of the things that you talk about is your family, and the thought of you not being there for your young kids growing up.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about building wealth, I think something that's really important is being strategic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I've talked about on my podcast is strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is basically being able to project forward, right, where you want to be and working towards that. That's sort of how strategy works.
Yep.
And so a lot of young adults right now are not set up strategically.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is the average American does not have at least $1,000 in savings.
Mm-hmm.
They may not be able to come up with $400 in the case of an emergency. So we're not really set up for the future, right? With your experience, how are you thinking strategically, especially for your family, for
Mm-hmm.
your, for your beautiful wife and for your young kids?
Yeah. Yeah, I like, you mentioned something, I'm not going to be able to quote you exactly, but kind of starting with the ends in mind, right? We do this in business, right? There's this framework called OKRs, objectives and key results. So it's like there's this big high level objective, which is like maybe your aspirational goal. And then there's the key results, so the sub goals, the sub level things that need to be true to make that high level goal happen, right? And so, I mean, you can read a lot of different self-help books. I think this is kind of a common thought. I think it's a good exercise to spend some time doing. You should probably do it every so often, right? Because things could change in your life.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you mature and you have a better perspective later, or you have different things that you value. So I think setting some of those high level goals can then help orient you to all the other categories, right? So you have finances, you have physical health, you have, the raising of your kids and what that looks like. You have all these different goals. Successful marriage, whatever, career, whatever it might be. And these are questions of ethics, right? Ethics asks the question, like, what should I do in a given situation? How should I live? How do I make decisions? So I think this can help with both goal setting and decision making. And it is, what's your highest value? So for me, right, I already mentioned I'm a Christian. Westminster Confession says, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Okay, so that's my goal. So what are the ways in which I can orient my life that way? Part of that's through my family. Part of that's through honoring God by being a diligent worker, right? Many different ways you can do that. Being a good steward of your financial resources, of your talents, right? And so, one, doing that for myself, because I have to start there. So doing that for me is going to make me a stronger person to support my family in those ways. If I'm super self-centered, like, we were talking about, I like outdoors. I like four-wheeling. We were talking about my truck. Yeah. And, I could daydream all day about my new truck or lifting it or doing the different things or gear that I want to get. If I just pursue that, maybe I have some fun, but I'm not going to be able to achieve these other things. That's going to get in the way. And so I need to be doing it for myself. My wife and I, because I'm married, you might not be in this situation, you the person who's listening, but think ahead of that if that's something you want, right? You're going to have to talk about that. And then together we have to think about that for our kids. So, one, it's doing it to give our family success. And then two, it's teaching my kids to do that, to set goals, right? I mentioned it helps you make decisions too. If you have this high level goal that orients your life, you can set these other goals in order in that way. Yeah. Are these selfish or are these aligned with my vision? And then the other thing, the way in which that helps, this is the idea of the good, right? So the good is the highest, what's of highest value. When you're making decisions, it's between two things or maybe multiple things, and you choose the one that you think is most valuable. So if knowing the Lord is most valuable, well, that can help orient you. When you make a decision, what do I choose? You have that framework to lean back on. So it's not just a weighing of passions or a weighing of desires. You actually have a framework that you can step outside of your immediate feelings and look to.
Yeah. What about in terms of planning for the unexpected, right?
Yeah.
Because, your experience has definitely changed probably the way you think about so many different things. And values is something that I want to get into later on.
Oh, yeah.
But how has, your experience changed the way you plan for the unexpected?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a few different things, like you say, expect the unexpected. And that is that expect that something's going to happen. Don't know what it might be. And so I think that means that you don't have to prepare in a specific way. You don't have to prepare to have cancer, but prepare in a way, financially and otherwise, that would apply to all those situations. So you mentioned like savings, things like that. Be thoughtful. Pay attention to what you're doing. Have a baseline, like if your car blew up, what would you do? Would you be able to afford it? If you were out of work for 6 months because you break your leg or you get cancer or whatever it might be, what would you do? If you died, what would your spouse do? Do you have provisions in place to take care of those things? And for some of them, it's just a matter of saving and budgeting and being organized in that way. For other things, maybe there's, professionals you need to talk to connect you up, right? Or things through your employer or whatever, right? If it's related to disability or things of that nature. So think about those. To the earlier point, don't think that you're immune to them just because you're young and healthy. That's the time to get them in place. Otherwise, you're chasing it.
Yeah.
Right? If I would have started working on those things after I had cancer, it'd be too late. I can't save now that I have cancer because I'm spending my money on treatments and whatever else. So start it before the problem happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of, starting it before the problem happens, I think one thing I was talking about in one of my previous episodes was you don't want to seek information when you're in the situation.
Yeah.
You want to have that information before you even get into the situation. And most of the time, if you have that information, you may not even end up in that situation in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's something to think about. And that brings me back to the strategic thinking, right? Because what strategic thinking really is to be able to project forward and even anticipate what could go wrong and being prepared for that. Businesses do that all the time. You're always, they may call it risk management, but what it is they're projecting what could go wrong and being prepared in case that went wrong. And so thank you so much for sharing that. Another thing that I want to dive into is values. So when I think of even myself, I think recently I sat down and I said, what are my values? What do I really value as a person? And I actually got this idea from this video that I watched, a Stanford University video, View from the Top, that I watched. And Tristan Walker was the CEO that was speaking at the time. And what he talks about is just sitting down to write his values down. It's an exercise that takes time. It takes thinking.
Yeah.
But when you do that, it helps you in decision making in so many ways. What are your personal values and how have those values changed over time? Because when I think of the people we speak to with this podcast, these are young adults that are just getting started on their financial journey.
Yeah.
They may not even have gotten to the point where they're even thinking about values. They may not even know what values are.
Yeah.
Why should I even have values? What's the point of values?
Yeah.
Think of a business. I always like to use businesses as an example. Businesses always kind of have values. And the reason why businesses have values is because they have to make so many decisions so many different times. And values can always act as almost as a filter for decision making. If you're going to get into an argument with someone, you might reflect on one of your values and say, one of my values is kindness, and my kindness value does not allow me to maybe use certain words against you. So I'm just going to let that go. In that instance, it's your value that kind of guided your decision making. So how have your values changed over time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think sometimes people will there's just several different ways people think about it, right? Like some people are kind of duty oriented, right? They have a duty to do a certain thing. They might not be able to really articulate why, right? Maybe lying is one, like, I don't lie. Okay. Why is lying wrong? Well, it is, I believe it's wrong, obviously. But I think it's good to be able to give kind of an explanation of why, how it harms another human, how dishonesty is bad. How my values changed over time. I'd say that they've, in some ways, maybe stayed the same in a certain sense, but I think they've deepened in terms of my reasoning behind them, and maybe become more refined in terms of how to achieve those things, right? Changed in one sense, I'd say when I was younger, definitely more oriented towards just enjoyment, right? Happiness. But something I've come to realize is happiness is, it's an effect, it's a byproduct. It's not something that you can go get just on its own. What are you doing today? Well, I'm going to go get some happy. You can't, it doesn't work that way, right? It's an effect of believing that you possess something good, right? Now, the problem there is, what if you're wrong? Right? I used to like soda and energy drinks a lot. Those are not good for your health. And I don't know whether they caused my cancer. Maybe they contributed to it. But that's it's a silly example of like, well, I was wrong about that. But maybe you're chasing something down because you think it'll make you happy, and then what you're seeking is actually not happy, or not good for you. Another component there is whatever it is you're seeking ultimately like lasting. So when I was younger, I was oriented more towards having fun doing things I liked in the moment. Nothing wrong with those necessarily in themselves, right? You need leisure, you need a break from the grind and the work. You can have hobbies. But if that's your primary source of happiness in life, it's not going to be lasting. Your body wears out over time. So if you like riding dirt bikes, you're not going to be able to do that when you're 80, right? Well, maybe you say, but I like crocheting and I can do that till I die. Well, okay. If you do it for 1,000,000 years and then it still brings you the excitement, you come talk to me, right? So it's not lasting in that way. So again, I tie that where it's become more refined is that I still enjoy a lot of those things that are fun, but they've become more of like leisure activities or something on the side versus the core value of my life is knowing God and making him known. And that's, I place that at the top of the value hierarchy. And then I can orient everything else. I can structure my life toward that goal in a certain way or toward that value, right? And there's a bunch of stuff that goes with that. I think it tells you all about, all the different decisions you can make. There's a moral law tied to that, and there's all kinds of things. But it influences how I raise my kids, right? And there's a structure, there's a hierarchy to it. So it informs other values. Yeah.
Are there any values you didn't have before you were diagnosed with cancer that you've adapted now?
I don't know if this falls in the category of value, but I'd say a sense of urgency, right? I think it should always be there. Like I said before, we're going to die, like from the second you're born. But the urgency, so often it doesn't become real. And so with cancer, not to sound dramatic, people have had worse experiences than I have, certainly, but I've looked death right in the face for months, and I still have thoughts about it, right? Cancer likes to come back. So right now, for all listening, I don't know if this was mentioned, but I'm doing good. My scans are coming back clean. The stage 4 cancer has retreated, and I'm happy for that. But you don't know when it's going to come back. So there's a sense of urgency there that I think is important to have, whether you have a current trial or not, is to think about, okay, the Bible talks about, like, maybe you live maybe 80 years by way of strength, if you're a strong person, and maybe today, maybe you live to 110. However old you live, I bet you could talk to any person that you consider to be old, and they say life goes quick. Life goes fast. So pay attention, right? That's probably, if I get depressed about anything, it's probably, I don't try to go back into the past and think about like the time I've wasted, but even now I struggle with it a little bit when I get sucked into something, and then I look back, I'm like, man, that wasn't a valuable use of my time. So that urgency is definitely I don't know if it's a value, but it's a driving force that I would say is intensified, that I feel more, and I'd encourage everyone not to dwell on the negative, but to adopt that.
Yeah.
Right? You live your life in that way with some intensity.
Yeah. That's so important, because I think a lot of young adults, myself as an example, have all these dreams and things that we want to do. And a lot of young adults, myself as an example, have all these dreams and things that we want to do, but sometimes we procrastinate. Whether we procrastinate on purpose, whether we procrastinate because there's a gap between the skill needed and the task that needs to be completed, we procrastinate, and then we take forever to do these things. If someone struggles with that right now, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, and like we were talking about earlier, I think that can apply to so many things, procrastination, right? But you can nickel and dime yourself out of time. You can nickel and dime yourself out of wealth. So I was joking about, like, I like, a vice in the past, like, okay, I stop at the gas station, fill up on gas, and get a Gatorade or something. I feel $2 here, $2 there, and all of a sudden at the end of the month you spent $300 on Gatorades. What the heck are you doing? Or a popular one, I never got into Starbucks, but those things are like $8. And it's kind of similar with your time. You have 3 weeks to work on something and you procrastinate. All of a sudden it's the night before. All of a sudden you're 80 and you did that your whole life, right? So I think a couple things. One, it's important to get more realistic with like how long something might take. So maybe a solution to that is time boxing. I know something that frustrates me is like I often get too ambitious with how much I can get done in a day, and when I don't achieve that, then I'll be frustrated. And part of that comes with like having kids and stuff, like someone pukes on you and whatever, right? That can interrupt your flow. I think setting boundaries. So what I mean is like, maybe it's setting boundaries around how much time you spend at work, or putting limits on yourself. We have these really cool fancy phones now, and they have ways where you can limit. Maybe you need an accountability partner for it, but you can limit how much time you spend on social media, or how much time you spend on whatever, right? So if that's a challenge you have, I get caught up in social media, or I get caught up in whatever it might be, put some boundaries around that to limit yourself so you don't frivolously waste that time. Another, these are just kind of off the cuff. Another thing, build systems, right? You were talking about like waiting for it to get perfect. Well, as an example of that, I've been trying to make some videos recently, and I was sharing with you that I wasted like 3 months just trying to figure out like, okay, how does this camera work? And like get it just perfect. And it's like, well, no one's even watching my videos. I just got to start making stuff, right? But then once I do, okay, what parts of your workflow are repeatable, right? And you do this with your personal life too, whatever it is, right? To better use your time. That's kind of the underlying theme here. So maybe we're making videos, right? Okay, you're going to put it on YouTube. You're going to have a thumbnail, and you're going to have all these things. Okay, what parts of that can you reuse? Can you have a template for your thumbnail that you can repeat and change a little bit? Can you have a structure just to your workflow where you plug in, okay, now I got this new idea for a script or, whatever it is going to be. Okay, can I structure that? Maybe it's in your personal life. I joke about this. My wife and I used to we'd get frustrated with each other because I'd put things that weren't supposed to go in the dryer. And I'm like, well, I pulled 3 of them out, but there's 4 in there. Oh, dang it. And I get in trouble. And so, okay, problem solve that. So if there's an area of friction in your life, start thinking about it. Let's do some process improvement. Okay, what's the problem? All right, I got to put the stuff's not supposed to go in the dryer I wash the colored stuff with the white stuff. So what we do? Okay, our first iteration of that. All right, we made 3 hampers. So we got one for the stuff that never goes in the dryer, one for the colors, one for the whites. Okay, well now we error proof that. So I can this whole load doesn't go in the dryer. I don't have to think about it. So if there's things like that you can do, right? Maybe you pare down the amount of clothes you have. That could be another budgeting thing, by the way, on the side. But maybe you pare down the number of clothes you have. I did this at one point, and it was like amazing how much stress it reduces. Crazy. Where, okay, I only have enough clothes. I don't need 5 months worth of clothes. I just have enough clothes for a week or 2. Whatever, pick your poison. How much, right? And now it kind of error proofs it. I've designed my life. I don't know what the word is for that, but you design your environment to help you maximize your time.
Yeah. James Clear talks about it in his book, right?
Yeah.
Which is, building systems. And ultimately what you want to do is you just want to reduce the decisions you make.
Yeah.
Which, if you're a creator, if you're an entrepreneur, to your point, there are some redundancy in your processes that you can cut out. And time is what we're talking about, is a very finite resource.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you can create these systems, the more time you can free up for other things that you love to do.
Absolutely.
Man, thanks so much for sharing that. That's,
reduce your stress too.
Yeah. And using creativity to do that. And it's really possible to do that. A lot of iterations is needed. Sometimes the first decision you're probably going to make might not be the right one, but that first decision might lead you to the next decision, and that next decision could lead you to the right decision. And so, speaking of decisions, you're a father of 3 young kids, right? Mm-hmm. And you've recently also been diagnosed with cancer. How has that changed, or what kind of financial foundation are you building for your kids now?
Yeah, so a few things like I mentioned before, like, if you're in good health, you want to think about that. Like, what would happen if I couldn't work for 6 months? What would happen if I died? Like, what would my family do? Right now I'm in a situation where, like, my wife stopped working because one of the things that we value is, not the people that don't value this, but we want to educate our kids, and we're doing homeschooling. Well, so that's a sacrifice we're making, right? One income. We'd be balling if we were both working. We're doing really well when we were both working. So I got to think about that. So part of that is, like I mentioned before, you got to be thoughtful. We just talked about putting structures in place for using your time best. I think you got to do that with your money too, right? So know how much comes in, goes out. Pay attention to that. Use that. That's your highest level framework, right? But then you got to think about, okay, future goals. What trade-offs do I want to make? Right? That's a kind of buzzword now. It's almost silly to talk about, like, delayed gratification. But if you didn't get it growing up, I wasn't really, no shade, thrown at my parents about that. They might not have been taught. But I wasn't really brought up with that teaching. So it's something I got to learn later. Maybe I'm disadvantaged. So I got to develop that for myself. Luckily, my wife's really good at that, right? I'm the guy that, like, soon as something comes in from Amazon, like, I want to open it up, and put it together, and, like, play with it, and, even when I'm giving gifts, like, I want to, it's hard for me. I almost have to, like, hide it for myself because I don't want to give it away ahead of time. Whereas she can like totally like delayed gratification. She's really good at that. So we balance each other out in that way. But you got to develop that in yourself. And you got to think about, okay, well, how, in the same way, how am I spending my time? How am I spending my other things? How are those oriented towards the well-being of my family? Of course, you can have some leisure. You got to set aside some things for that. How am I planning for the future? I need to think about that. Again, those are things you can, talk to professionals about in terms of like specifics. But the other thing I'm thinking about also is, of course, like I want to leave them wealth, but that's not my primary goal, right? On a side, kind of related to this, like one of the hard conversations we have, you should have it even if you're not facing this, if you have kids or anything. My wife and I had to talk about, like, if both of us passed away, who would raise our kids? How would that go? And it's a more complicated consideration than you think, because there's the financial piece, there's the spiritual piece, there's all the different pieces, right? We know so many people who love them and take care of them. We have no doubt about that. But what would set them up most for success? Man, that's a crazy thing to think about. It's kind of a sad thing. But that's where it came out in my mind more clearly, like, okay, yeah, leaving them for wealth, or leaving them with wealth for that situation is something that's important to me, but it's not the primary. The thing I really want to do is equip them to be excellent humans. I don't mean that in some comparative way, like some humans are excellent and other ones aren't excellent. Mm-hmm. I mean in a sense of like, what does it mean to be a human? And that's connected up with my value of, I think, knowing God, right? So we're made in God's image. We're image bearers of God, and that part of that means that we're created with a rational mind that can understand Him. And so how do I teach my kids how to think well, how to use logic and navigate the world? Because that's going to apply to everything they do. That's a skill, right? Thinking about how we delineate our different types of laundry. We're using reason, right? We're using our logic to sort out that problem. Thinking about how to debate or set up a budget, thinking about how to organize a time. We're using reason, right? So yeah, teaching them how to think, teaching them to be competent. So by competence, I mean seeing an end. It's kind of connected up with wisdom. So wisdom is knowing what's good and how to get it. And competence is kind of similar, like, but maybe it's not as tightly connected to your virtues. So someone could be competent in doing evil, right? But it's knowing what end do you have in mind and being able to achieve that end. So we were talking about, I really like working on cars. One of the things I value, like, and it saves me money, is like fixing my own car, fixing my own house. Well, maybe that's one area of competence. So that's something that's important to me that I want to teach my kids, is like, hey, you can, believe it or not, you can look up and figure out how to do a lot of things without paying someone else to do it. And that could save you a lot of money in life. But it's not only that, it could be, I was sharing with you also, like another way, like maybe you're not interested in that, or maybe you're not mechanically inclined, so you're not going to fix your car. But can I teach you just to be unshakable in a way where, okay, your car breaks down, maybe you don't know how to fix it, but that doesn't deter you. You know the steps to take and who to call to get it fixed, right? Maybe some of these financial things, or insurance or wherever it is, you know who to call. You're not the expert, but you know how to navigate it and get it done. So in addition to providing that financial stability for my kids while they're with me, and then after I'm gone, I think even the more valuable thing is making sure they know God, but not only in a, way where it's just they've adopted what their parents taught them, because everyone has that.
Yeah.
But that they are active thinkers who are understanding what it is they've been taught, who are able to take those things and apply them to other areas of their life, right? So building this competence in my kids. To extend the answer even longer, you and I were talking about like the inheritance we had from our families of like, I wasn't given a good example of how to act with money, right? It's like, my parents at one point got a lot of money. We won't talk so much about how they got the money, but they got a lot of money. And it was just spent so quickly, right? There's no wealth building there at all. And so we weren't raised with that. You know, home economics, that's not a thing anymore. People don't have to balance their budget. And so we got this digital age. Money doesn't feel like a real thing.
Swipe.
Yep, swipe. You're not connected with it. That's how that Gatorade problem happens, because I don't got a pocket full of change that's dwindling down. She's like, oh, $2, $3 here, you know, that's nothing. But it adds up. And it not only adds up in the short term, it adds up across your lifetime. So whatever shortcomings we have, we could blame it on our parents. They didn't teach me how to budget, whatever. Okay, well, where's the cycle stop? Because they probably didn't get taught either.
Yeah.
So rather than spending all my time and effort blaming that, okay, how do I learn it so that I can implement it? And then how do I pass that knowledge on to my kids? And it's generational in that way, right? Changing their culture, if you want to call it that, right? So teaching them, and so legacy also connects with that, right? Teaching them, they're going to teach their kids. It connects up with that post-millennial hope we were talking about earlier, right? The earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as water cover the sea. That's the end goal. So there's the idea that that's going to be generation after generation after generation. So if I make a misstep, it's going to reverberate. What's there? There's that. What's that movie? The Butterfly Effect, right? I don't know if maybe I don't know the plot well enough to make this application, but it's the idea that, like, okay, that choice reverberates and has downstream effects. So let's let my kids be a good downstream effect on the culture and on society and on our lineage. So,
yeah, man, that's, you know, I think my next question was going to be, what do you want your legacy to be? But I feel like you've really already answered that question right now with everything that you've just said so far. Now, when you're not with your kids, when you're not with your wife, how are you spending your time?
That's a good question. You put me on the spot. I probably could spend my time better for all I'm saying about spending your time well. Yeah, I think so. Coming out of the whole cancer thing, I feel like I have a new lease on life. And I'm not dwelling in this, but one frustration I've had is I feel like I haven't always identified my talents and lived up to those in a certain way. And so I'm trying to maximize those, both in you know, my personal life and my career and other endeavors I have going on. I'm also really kind of in that same vein of self-development, trying to use this cancer experience as an opportunity to witness. It opens up a lot of avenues. I'll just share with you, I was joking. I'd always joke with the nurses and doctors in the hospital that, you know, I was like, well, one of the good things about having cancer is you have to listen to me. And then I would kind of joke and do this sad face and say, oh, it's because he's got cancer, you know, you got to listen. And they laugh, and that, you know, not that everyone has to do this. If you have some hardship going on, I just have a personality where maybe I'm more outgoing, and that kind of would break the ice. And so in an interesting way where I'm joking about them having to listen to me, they wind up listening to me, and we can talk about more real things that it might just be awkward to, like, jump into a conversation about mortality with some stranger that you just met.
Yeah.
But now I can share these ideas and talk to them. And so I'm trying to do that just all the time, right? And being bold, and I've met a lot of new friends that way. So I don't know that I have a really tight answer about how I'm using my time, but I'd say it's those things. I want to use my time to witness to people. This post on LinkedIn kind of blew up. I didn't anticipate that, so it kind of forced me into an area of discomfort, which is probably good, right? Time of growth because of that. But I've got all kinds of people reaching out to me about things that I would have never thought of before, right? And maybe I'm not an expert, but if I can help them think through that thing, even provide a different perspective. That's great. If I can point them to God, that's awesome. So yeah, really trying to use my time and talents in a way that's God honoring, that, you know, benefits my family. Just more thoughtfulness.
Yeah. So when you talk about using, you know, your talents, I think I was talking to one of my friends yesterday, and she was telling me how one of her siblings is talented in sports.
Mm-hmm.
And so they wanted to play sports, and because of that they didn't go to school, they dropped out of school and so on. And when I listened to her, I said, you know, there's a huge disconnect, right, between using your talent and the amount of work that needs to be done to actually realize that talent. Because sometimes, and the reason I bring this up is because your talent could be your access to your wealth in so many different ways, but it's not going to be handed to you, right? You need to be able to cultivate the time to actually turn the talent into something that people want to pay for.
Yep.
You could be really talented in something, and you might just have to end up doing it for free because you're not really good at it. You just have the talent to do it.
Yeah.
For example, Kevin Hart is probably a talented comedian, but he's worked on it over time that now people pay thousands of dollars to go see him perform. He's developed
refined it. Yeah.
If not, he would be on a bridge somewhere with a microphone and a speaker, just joking, and
he hasn't cultivated that talent.
He hasn't cultivated that talent.
He hasn't monetized it either. Yeah.
And monetizing it takes so much time to actually be able to do that. And that's something that I wanted to talk about, because I think young adults today, especially with the sensation of the internet, we look at people like, for example, you look at Bill Gates and you think, oh my God, this guy's, you know, he made it. And if he made it, I can make it. And what you don't realize is he probably sat down hundreds of hours writing code, debugging his code, and all of that is not in the story. What you see is the end product that today we call Microsoft, right? So there's all this hard work that has to go into cultivating the talent to ultimately be able to use that to build wealth, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is, man, there's so much to say on that topic. One, like, I feel like I'm one of these people, but it's almost a cliche of talented people who are lazy, right? Whether that's actually lazy or they've just neglected to cultivate the talent. So maybe you start off and you're kind of inclined in a certain way and you're better than most to start with doing a certain thing. Well, that's great. But yeah, if you don't cultivate that, there's probably all kinds of examples of professional athletes. Like, that's one of the more competitive things to break into, right? We got plenty of examples of people who are, you know, not the most talented, but because of how hardworking they are, they developed that. And then where you really see superstars is people that are both hardworking and talented. I think it's kind of a moral category too to develop that talent, right? Because I think if you neglect your talent, you're not being a good steward. You're cutting yourself short, but you're also cutting everyone else short. So this whole project of humanity is a joint effort. We're not all good at everything. And so we need the help of every individual, right? Yeah. We talk about that post-millennial hope. I need your talent, Papa, and you need my talent, right? And we all need each other's talent in order to live day to day in our economy, in order to know God to the fullest degree, right? He's given us his creation to understand and draw out in a certain way. We got technology, which is harnessing the power in creation, right? We're harnessing electricity right now that comes from the world in order to power our microphones. That's crazy, right? And so every different person has a different contribution. And it's crazy how that person's talent in harnessing this electricity all of a sudden is enabling you and I to communicate with however many people listen to this. Like, it's an interconnected web. So, yeah, I think we've lost. It comes back to that delayed gratification thing, right? because even if you have the talent, there's so many people in the world that you have to be competitive. Even all the talented people have to compete with each other. We've lost the idea of mastery. And that takes, there's the old saying about like, the violin master or whatever takes however many, 10,000 hours or whatever, I don't know.
The 10,000 hour rule, yeah.
However many hours, right? And it's like, if someone does 10,000 hours, like there's no one that's done that amount of practice who isn't a master or something like that, right? I don't know if that's true or not, right? You got to have perfect practice makes, I don't know. There's some saying there, but yeah, I think where we can all start is, and that's where it's important to hear other stories, is we start with consistency. So little steps. It comes back to that Atomic Habits book you were talking about, right? So like, I think it's something like if you do 1% better every day, there's some statistic. But yeah, figure out what it is you want to get good at and just start doing it, cultivating that expertise. Maybe you change. Doesn't mean you can't switch later, but that applies to everything. It applies to wealth, right? You don't just save all your retirement savings overnight. It takes time. It takes consistency.
It takes time.
We can't, here's the other thing I was going to say. We all want an epiphany. And that we think of more in terms of like this sudden leap in insight. Mm-hmm. Like all of a sudden I just realized, and I understood all the, I took this special mushroom and now I just understand all the secrets of the universe. Well, first of all, that's probably not going to happen at all, but I think we apply that to everything. We want to be the overnight phenomena. We want our LinkedIn post to go viral, right? We want all these things, but it usually doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to happen that way,
no.
Right? Because, look, impact is something that's usually so underrated. You could, even if you impact just one life, you've probably done your job.
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, social media has given us this sort of viral sickness where we feel like if it's not viral, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
Trust me, maybe it was that one person that your message was supposed to hit and change your life. And that was it. That was that. And, you start to think, okay, I didn't get to this point, and so it's not good enough. But look, that's where the concept of talent meets preparation comes in again, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you're looking to use your talent to create wealth, one thing to note is, to your point, it takes time. And not only does it take time, it takes a really long time. Some people get lucky. Mm-hmm. And usually that luck is a result of your preparation, and you end up being at the right place at the right time, and things just blow up. Similar to how you and I met, mm-hmm. right? I think I was preparing for my next few episodes, and when I'm preparing for my next few episodes, I'm on a few different platforms. Yeah. Whether it's YouTube, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Instagram, wherever, right? I'm just always scouting, reading stories, finding things that are inspirational that I can share on the platform. And I came across your story, right? Mm-hmm. And if I wasn't prepared to be reaching out, if I was in a state of mind of procrastination, okay, maybe I'll do it tomorrow, maybe I'll do it later on, I don't really have the right message to send to you. Yeah. I didn't write the message and say, oh man, it's not perfect. Let me backspace and let me rewrite, and maybe I'll do it tomorrow, and so on. And I would probably never get to it, and we wouldn't be here, And so that talent meeting, preparation, it goes a long way when you prepare.
Yeah. Yeah. You want to be ready to capitalize. Yeah. It's rare. Like there's a song that went viral recently. We don't have to mention it because it's probably mixed reception, but
what's the song? I would know the
song. What is that song?
Is it the guy that plays the guitar?
Yeah. What's it called? A Rich Man North of Richmond.
Yes. I didn't know I haven't listened to the song yet, but I was reading the headline yesterday, and what I was reading is this guy is at the top of the charts on iTunes. And so I was watching this video where he's playing for, looks like thousands of people. And so before he played his song, he read a Bible verse and so on. And what he was saying was he really didn't mean to go viral. Yeah. He was just making a song, and now he can't believe he's sitting there playing a song for that many people.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think it's a good song. I don't think it's, as controversial as people are saying. Maybe it points out some problems we have in the country today, but at least it's food for thought, right? If we're thoughtful, composed humans, we can talk to each other and find solutions to things. But the example I was going to draw out with that is like he, I don't know what his backstory is. Didn't follow him. I haven't gone to do any research on it. But with all these overnight sensations, they grow from small audience to big audience overnight. But they don't grow from no talent or no ability to talent overnight, right? He clearly already has been writing songs and producing music. So when he was found, it's not like, they find this diamond in the rough that, now they polish into the next pop star. No, he's been working on that. Maybe he wasn't working on it with thoughts that he was going to explode in that way, but now he's already been writing music and doing that, so he's prepared for that. So that applies to all kinds of things. Like, you're exactly right. Even these overnight sensations, usually it's after years of work. Like, you've put enough out there, and then something you do get seen. Well, now he's got enough songs written already to produce an album, maybe.
Exactly.
Right?
And what I tell people too is, for example, if you're thinking of going viral, right, and maybe you just started, trust me, if you went viral, you wouldn't be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And success,
that's probably true.
It's not even about just being successful. Success is staying successful.
Yeah.
That's the most important part. You don't want to be successful. Anyone can just be successful, and you're just going to be a one-time success. Mm-hmm. You're going to be like an NBA player that played at a certain time, and you're going to be able to say in your resume, I played in the NBA, but nobody knows you played in the NBA.
Yep.
You were just a quick, you got your 15 seconds of fame and you move on. That's not the success you want. Sustainable success. That's what we're looking for.
Yeah. And the impact, you got to tie it back to your values. Yeah. What's your goal, right? Like my goal with this whole thing, perhaps it grows into more than just that. But like you said, like even if I could just affect one person. I remember telling one of the nurses, there was a guy, it was a nurse, this guy, and I remember talking to him and saying, this sounds really dramatic, and it kind of was. And I did kind of mean to put him on the spot, but in a good way. And I joked with him about it, like, hey, I'm going to make you uncomfortable right now. But I said, hey man, if I go through this and I die, but you came to the Lord because you met me, and your life was improved because you met me, it's all worth it. Now, if you ask me to make that decision, like, don't put that decision in my lap. If the choice is like, let me, choose between living a long life with my family and this guy that I don't really know well, coming to Christ because he met me, I'll probably make the wrong choice. But, the truth of it's there. If you can impact one person, now maybe your goal is different than that. Maybe your goal is to build a business. Okay, well, that's okay. I'm not saying that goal's wrong. But yeah, how are you thinking about impact? How does that connect with your values?
Yeah, that's really important. And that brings me to my next question, because I think one of the things about you that's so impressive is how you shared your story, right? And so when you're sharing your story, how do you want it to inspire other people?
Yeah, I don't want it to be about me. What I mean by that is, like, I do talk a lot. So, there's probably a part of me that likes being in the limelight in that way, right? Like, if I'm in a group of people, I like cracking jokes and being there. But I don't want it to be specific to me for a couple of reasons. One, I want to glorify God with my story. But two, I don't want someone to see me and think, well, I'm not outgoing in the way Will's outgoing, right? Or he's doing a particular thing that I couldn't do, right? I have a lot of shortcomings. Where I think stories are not the only way in which they're valuable, but one way in which they're valuable is we can, and I'm guilty of this too, we tend to alienate ourselves in so many different ways. So, right? As a Christian, something I think about is like sanctification, which is like overcoming sin, vices that you have in your life. It's easy to have a lot of negative self-talk and think like, oh, I'm worse than anyone else, or I'm lazier than anyone else, or whatever. That's just not true. There's a lot of humans, and there have been a lot of humans, right? Go read a biography of someone you find impressive, and you'll probably, if it's honestly written, you'll probably find out, wow, they had some short. They were human, right? And so I think that's a part that's important. I think so. Not excluding yourself from the possibility of success, not excluding yourself from the love of God. Like, you're not alone in that way. Two, I think you can see a lot of these backstories you're talking about, where we're talking about this guy and he's an overnight success, but what we didn't see was all the hard work that went into it. And so hearing the stories that people have, you can see that and maybe get a realization like, oh, maybe that's something I actually could do. Maybe not in the way that they did it, but it's possible to make changes. And it's not this epiphany, and it's not just a matter of willpower, right? We do have to have some determination, but there's more to it than that. You can be thoughtful. You can build into these things. Maybe stories can provide you hope. There's a lot of different ways they can use, right? I didn't know the outcome of what my cancer would be, and I still don't. But don't only read the stories about all the people dying. Read those. It's okay. Don't avoid those. I met people who were, very terminal, very close to the end. But don't pigeonhole yourself into that. Read stories as successes too, and realize that there's, your story isn't finished yet.
Yeah. You just mentioned that you met people that were terminal and very close. What kind of advice do they give you?
Different. It really is different. One thing I'll connect back up with, we were talking about earlier, hope and faith. And I think where people sit on that spectrum and the kinds of things that they're having hope in or not having hope in, they're really contingent on their worldview, and really dictates a lot of how they share it, right? So maybe three broad categories I'd say is like what I would put in the category of true hope, right? I've connected up a lot with my faith. Like, true hope is in these promises from God that we know are firm, that we can rest in. False hope might be presumption. I've met a lot of that, and I don't discourage people in this way. I'm not saying we can't be optimistic at all, but I had a lot of people tell me like, oh, you're going to be healed. And I wouldn't confront them in the moment, but it wasn't helpful to me in my own psychology to think that way, because I just knew, no, we don't know. We really don't know. I'm not going to be pessimistic and just reserve myself to death, but we don't know. And so I got to prepare for both. And then another big category I saw is bitterness. And I don't want to throw these people under the bus, because I can see how easy it would become bitter, right? Mm-hmm. You're looking death in the face. The things that you wanted out of life maybe haven't happened if you're of a certain age, or you see them slipping away, these hopes that you had. So it's contingent on that. So, I got a lot of people who encouraged me kind of in the way I'm wanting to encourage others, in terms of this eternal hope that we have, this eternal life, and knowing God and making Him known. I had, a lot of pessimistic joking, and I would say the bitterness and anger was probably the least of what I experienced. Mostly people were supportive of each other. So kind of a mixed bag, a lot of positivity, even from people who were like, didn't think that they were going to make it personally. Wow. One of the first people I met, he was in his second bout. He had gone into remission for pancreatic cancer. He'd been there for a year, and then it came back, and it was already stage 4. And so he was doing chemo just to extend his life. And him and I kind of shared a tear, and he was really had such a astoundingly positive attitude, and he was pouring into his family, he was turning to God. And so there's a split. I guess to turn it around, advice I give to people in a unique category is if you're meeting someone with cancer, maybe I'm unique in that I'll give 2 pieces of advice. If you're the one who has cancer, this is dependent on your personality. So don't think to yourself like you have to be the way I was or that I was the right way. But what I noticed is people don't know how to interact with you. Not because they don't care, but they can see how terrifying that would be, and they don't want to say the wrong thing.
I full disclosure, I felt that, right?
Yeah.
Even with our conversation, and I try to ask myself, I'm like, okay, how do I want to approach this?
Yeah.
Because I tend to be a really positive person.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think of the theme of this podcast, building wealth, uplifting people, personal development, I didn't want to dwell on the morbid things,
yeah.
right? But I also wanted it to be in a way that you're able to authentically share your story, without also not saying the wrong things.
Yeah. So to those who have cancer, I'd say just be aware that you are the one who gets to set the tone, right? And people will follow your lead. So if you want to talk about it and you want interaction, because one of my fears was like I had a lot of interaction in the early stages. And one thing I was scared about was, what if as time goes on, people start withdrawing from me? So now I'm getting a lot of love in the beginning. What if, a year from now, I'm really struggling and that love is kind of shrunk back? So I kind of shared that with certain people. And I led that conversation. Now, did I feel that way the whole time? There are low points, right? Part of treatment kind of depletes your body. And so there's times where I was tired and I wasn't as talkative. But you lead that. And so something I really tried to do, and again, this is where I'm saying, if you have cancer, you don't have to follow my lead in this. But if you want this, I'd encourage you to do it, is I would try to break the ice. I would, maybe you're not in a place where you can crack jokes about it. I did, but you're leading that tone. So if you want people to interact with you and not feel awkward, because your relationship's going to feel different, lead in that way and make it comfortable. I know maybe some people say, well, the work shouldn't be on me. I'm the one with cancer. Well, yeah, but it kind of is, right? You can't avoid it because the people are awkward out of respect because they don't know how to talk to you about it. So you got to kind of lead with what that's going to look like. Maybe it's not talking about cancer all the time. Maybe it's something else, but you can help it be normal. And then for the people that don't have cancer looking in, realize like everyone's going to be processing it differently. It's going to depend on what their worldview is, their background, their family situation, right? I've met other cancer patients who were really moved by my story because they're at a different stage in life, right? They looked at me and they said, wow, your kids are so young. It's not as bad for me because I'm not in that scenario, which I don't know. Comparing suffering in that way is maybe not productive. Like everyone, right? Even if you just get in a car wreck, like everyone's suffering. It's hard. Yeah. So some friends would say, what I'm going through doesn't compare. I'm like, well, don't even think about that. Yeah. It's still hard. Like, come on. People have gone through way worse than me. I don't, whatever it is, it's hard. So yeah, follow their lead. Don't be afraid to reach out. If they tell you that's not what they want, if they respond to you in a way that's out of their character, don't take it personally, And for those that are in the bitter camp, I would say, I love you. It's painful. Reach out if you ever want to talk. I do have a limited capacity. That's something I learned with this whole, not quite viral, but to me viral, because I don't do a lot on social media, but I got more messages than I could bargain with. But if you want to talk at all and you're in that category, you're feeling bitter and you have something like this going on, reach out. I do think it's not just false hope that I have in Christ. It's something it's not just a God of the gaps. It's not just the opiate of the masses. It's a true solid foundation that you can put your hope in. and it's there for you, whether that's something you currently believe or not. There's not a time limit on, well, there is a time limit, and that is your life, but there's not a time limit on it's too late now. I haven't lived that way, or I haven't explored that.
Yeah. Did you always have this perspective before your experience, or has it exacerbated since your experience?
I'd say my belief in God and how that aligns with everything. These are things I believed before, but they've been tested and deepened. So there's nothing wrong with like a deathbed conversion, right? Because I think it sounds like this is going to be a weird statement, but that's good. It'll get people to think outside the box. Some of the value in death is that it forces you to think about the things that you're believing. It forces you to think, well, I'm going to die. What's going to happen? Right? You have to wrestle with those beliefs. And most of us neglect them. And the neglect probably starts early, because you ask your parents questions, and it gets to a point where they can't answer you in ways that's satisfactory. Or they stop answering you because they're irritated. So if you're a parent, don't stop answering your kids, right? I'm a parent, so I know when my kid asks me 500 questions in a row, I know what that's like, and I get tired too. But don't stop, we want them to explore those things. Those questions come up naturally for kids. Where'd this come from? Where'd God come from? Talk about those things. If you don't know the answers, let that push you to figure out what the answers are. So I believed these things before. I did have a shift in my worldview in my early 20s, coming out of my childhood, where I was raised in a way that it's more like a blind belief, right? Just believe it because you're raised with it. Believe it because I believe because I was scared of going to hell. I think it needs to be more than that. It can't just be fear. It's got to be, substantiated. Like, is this true or not? And so, but this trial has definitely tested me and pushed my boundaries with that. It's made me realize I can't put all my hope, trust in myself and my strength or in another person, because we're all finite and weak. I got to put my hope in what's infinite. So yeah, I think that's the way in which, but maybe it shifts for someone else. I know a lot of people that do totally shift their worldview coming out of something like this. And you can go one or two ways. You can go towards kind of shaking your fist and saying this is unfair, but I don't know what fairness would mean, right? Or you can say, okay, this is an opportunity. This is really forcing me to consider these things that I haven't considered before. So I think the value is like in the urgency that it provides.
Yeah. And I've heard stories of people who, when they're near these experiences, near-death experiences, they have some sort of like revelations, right? Have you had any of those?
If you mean like a special revelation, and as a I like philosophy and I like theology and those things. If you mean like a special message from God, I'd say no. But I've definitely come to a new understanding of things. So my understanding, I think, has been deepened. There's a good book, one of the most popular books ever written, actually. It's called Pilgrim's Progress. I was encouraged to read that at the start of my cancer journey. And it's a really good book. It's a very old book. I think it's the second most published and purchased book, second to the Bible. But it's a story, and there's two not editions, but two volumes. It's a story about the challenges we go through in life, particularly from a Christian's perspective. How to interpret those. It's a story of endurance. And it's a really human story because it's not just a smooth road, right? We think about growing our wealth. It's like bouncing a yo-yo while you're walking up the stairs, is the analogy like you use, right? There's ups and downs, but the overall trajectory's upward. So I definitely encourage people to read Pilgrim's Progress. I think I lost my train of thought on your question.
Yeah, no, I was just asking if you've had any revelations.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is just what it means to trust in Christ more. So that's solid foundation. So it's kind of like one thing to give it lip service. It's another thing when you're looking death in the face and you're like, I'm all chances are that I die, and not, I mean, of course everyone's going to, but soon. And there's nothing else that I can put my hope in, right? And I think he provides all these means. I was kind of criticized at one point for like, why don't you thank the doctors, and why don't you thank the, your family and friends? And one thing I will say, thank you to all my doctors and nurses, and my wife especially. She's incredible. She sacrificed so much in taking care of my family and our kids and me, and seeing me at my lowest points and still being loving and supportive. Thank you to her parents, our church family, my family, so many people, first off. But that criticism of, why do you think those people? Yeah, I do think those people. And those people are praising God with me, right? Even a lot of my doctors. So it's just realizing like how fragile life is, and that's the only foundation that I can hold to. Any other plans I have could get disrupted. Bringing it back to goals too, is if my goal is aimed at the wrong thing, that's going to be really disappointing. And maybe it is, there's still disappointments. But things not going the way that I wanted them to go is less disappointing if my overarching goal is aligned with God's goals.
Yeah, man, this has been such a great conversation. There's one question that I ask every guest that comes on the podcast. I usually ask them, what's the definition of wealth? Mm-hmm. But I kind of want to spin it a little bit for you and ask you, what is your definition of wealth, and what does life mean to you now?
Yeah. So I would tie it back into what we said earlier about values, like what's of highest value. The way I shared before, the Westminster Confession puts it is man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. It's kind of old Englishy language. People say, who says that? Man's chief end. What kind of a thing does that say? I'd say whatever's the most valuable thing in your life. And going through this experience, it's strikingly clear how everything else falls away. Right? We talk about, you see the sticker on the back of the pickup truck, whoever dies with the most toys wins, and they're kind of joking about like, or there's these songs like, money can't buy happiness, but it could buy me a truck, and they're still, right? There's the country song.
Yeah.
And they're still saying, well, yeah, it's, it's money, it's the stuff. I like stuff. I like success. I like these things, but none of that stuff lasts, right? And I believe that there's continuity. I think when your body ceases to function, because that's what happens, right? Your body doesn't disappear. When you die, your body ceases to function. It stops working. And I believe we have a soul that continues. And guess what? Those blessings that come with knowing God, we talk about inalienable rights. Those are inalienable. Those can't be taken away. Whether life or death or whatever it is, whatever anyone's doing to you, it's not that we shouldn't try to stop people from doing bad things to each other. But whatever anyone's doing for me, they can't take that away from me. If I die, it goes with me. So when we're talking about wealth, those are the kind of things I want to store up for myself. Those are the kind of things I want to store up for my kids and my wife. Those are the kind of things I want to help you store up. When I say witness with my story, that's the kind of that's what I want. Right? Yeah. We're building the kingdom of God, so it's glorifying God, and it's benefiting us, even if we don't see it. To whatever degree we disagree with that, it's because of our sin. Right? If we think we're missing out because I don't get to go four-wheeling and go hunting as much as I want to do those things. I really do. I'm not going to be disappointed in those forever. Right?
Yeah. Man, this has been such a great conversation. Well, thank you so much for
Thanks for having me.
coming on the podcast. And I want to thank your wife, Rachel. I want to thank everyone that's in your community that's allowed us to be able to meet you and have you on the podcast. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and I cannot wait to have more conversations with you.
Absolutely, yeah.
I truly believe you're going to continue to make a solid impact, and please continue to share your story. You never know who you're impacting. I know you went viral on LinkedIn.
Small V, viral.
Hey, viral is viral, right?
Yeah.
So just continue to do that. And yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, if anyone wants to connect with me, they can find me on LinkedIn, or I'm doing YouTube and Twitter. I can share that stuff with you. But I don't know what the future will look like with it. But thank you so much for having me on. It's been awesome getting to know you.
Yeah, same here.
Excited for some good lunch and future conversations. I'll have to come out and visit you sometime.
Absolutely. Yeah, let's do it. Is there anything you wanted to talk about today that I probably haven't asked you about yet before we close it out?
I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. I'll make a joking aside, but I'm halfway serious. If there's any charity ideas, one idea I had is connect back with my wife. Like, she's done so much. There's probably stuff like this out there. But if anyone has interest in a charity oriented towards spouses or caregivers, I think there's a lot of things. There's one I might apply for going on an adventure, right? You get to go kayaking or something because you had cancer. I think caregivers need something like that. They go through so much. So if someone's interested in reaching out about that, it's a loose idea. I don't know that I have the capacity to chase it down, but I think that'd be cool.
Yeah. Well, GWP podcast, we love ideas. So thank you for throwing that idea out there. You never know. I might even grab onto it. Who knows? But hey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Will.
Thanks, Papa. Have a good one.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to another episode of GWP podcast. It means the world to us. Major thank you to our sound engineer, Jomar Cardoza, our video technician, Greg Scafferty, and Will Brantley for being our guest on the show. And to you for watching and also listening. Peace.